Now we're gonna move on to a conversation with Cherie. So Cherie's piece is the last piece in the first volume of our journal, entitled Pilgrim's Church 1349 Unfinished. And it's a really lovely painting along with a sort of short story to accompany it. So yeah. Hi, Cherie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe you can sort of introduce yourself.
Okay, hi Ryan, I'm Cherie. I am currently in between jobs, but I'll be starting work as a journalist later this year. Okay, so I guess background. I went to the local art school in Singapore, SOTA, for those of you who are Singaporean. So that's kind of where I learned how to paint. So I've been working with oils for about 8 years now. And then I went on to the UK to study history. Yeah, which is also where I met Alvin and got roped into this. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I can see some of those paintings that you speak of in the reflection in your window, which is great. Yeah, so maybe we could talk a little bit about your piece. Like, how did you chance upon this topic, or how did you decide to do this? I remember when I asked you, it was sort of I didn't sort of give a very specific direction to take. So how did you come upon this idea?
Yeah, I remember, I think, yeah, when you first told me about this project, you mentioned that the theme was pilgrimage. And I think my idea of pilgrimage has always been associated with the Middle Ages, just because I did a lot of medieval history at uni. So it's kind of like my, I guess, my historical soft spot. But yeah, so I think I wanted to capture that whole idea of the journey, and then sort of like making your final not final trip, but like ending up at the church that you were sort of like aiming for on your pilgrimage. Yeah, and I wanted to capture that quietness of just sitting in the pews alone, getting to enjoy the presence of God. Yeah, so I've never been on pilgrimage, but I've been to some of these older churches, and the most enjoyable part of the experience for me has always been, yeah, that quietness, that serenity. Yeah, so I knew I wanted those elements in my piece, but I think I wasn't that sure about how to go about conveying that at the start, and that's something that was developed along the way.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because there's both this sort of serenity and calmness in the way that you paint, and also in the way that you construct this sort of really vivid kind of context for your story. But there's also a sort of like sadness or like nostalgia. I'm not too sure how to put it rightly, but you know, it's sort of like the ruins of a church rather than a full church, and it's sort of, you know, a sort of situation which is perhaps not ideal in the story. So maybe you can share a bit about your process. So how did you get from that idea to with the final product that we see in the journal?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a conscious decision to make it sad. I think I'm, as a consumer of like literature and art, I'm just drawn to sad content. Not sure why. Maybe it's all the Korean dramas I watched as a kid, but yeah. I don't think I was going necessarily for something sad in the painting, but yeah, I do get what you mean by nostalgia. I think I wanted some pinkish tones, which yeah, do end up looking quite like wistful, a bit nostalgic in the end, and coupled with the fact that it's a ruined church. Yeah, I think I picked this photo reference because I thought it'd be interesting to sort of transform something that wasn't quite finished and something that was ruined into a painting that could still be beautiful or could still evoke the sense of, I guess, maybe peace, maybe even joy instead of just sadness. So for me, that was a bit of a challenge, and I found it like a more interesting combination than painting, let's say, like a finished church or like a big cathedral. Yeah, and I think for the story, I mean, obviously it was written in the middle of a pandemic, so revisiting a historical pandemic felt quite timely, and also allowed me to play with the ideas of hope and sort of salvation. So yeah, I think that's kind of where these ideas sprung from.
Yeah, that's cool. I realize I don't know if everyone in the audience has read your piece. So maybe do you want to provide like a really quick summary of what it's about?
Oh yeah, so the piece is about two kids who stumble upon this church that's being built in their village. But the church is also being built at a very inconvenient time in history, because it's right before the Black Death sort of sweeps over England, sorry. Yeah, so it ends off on this very ambiguous note, which yeah, and then I was hoping that the title would sort of imply what happened in the end, but yeah.
Yeah, I really like that ambiguity. I think that also speaks into our time where we also experience that ambiguity, and it says something about that unfinishedness which just pervades all of our lives. That we don't know the ending of the story until after we've lived through it. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So your piece has both this sort of visual art component and also a written component. So what's sort of different between preparing both of those? How did you integrate them, or like how did you think about them as you were working on them?
Okay, so I feel like I don't really have a very a writing process that's very set in stone, because this is actually my first attempt at fiction in about 8 years. Yeah, but I think in general, what I notice is that I make a lot more deliberate choices when I'm doing a written piece as opposed to a painting. So when I'm painting, I kind of just zone out, and it's more of like muscle memory for me. Whereas for writing, I think about every word and every sentence that goes into it and how that contributes to the overall story. Yeah, so I think it's more of like I don't know. I would say I'm definitely a lot stricter with myself when it comes to writing, I guess. Yeah.
Which I guess comes out of like your longer experience and with working with painting as opposed to with writing.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it's the medium I'm more used to, I guess.
So did you finish the painting first before starting on the short story? Did you conceptualize both at the same time? How did you go about doing both things?
Yeah, so I think initially I wasn't intending on doing a short story. I was gonna do a painting, and then I wanted to do like a short statement about it. Then I realized that, oh, this is actually a really interesting topic, and the painting felt really atmospheric when I was working on it. So I felt like, oh yeah, this would be a fun time to maybe explore fiction or see how I could develop the story from the setting. So that's kind of how the process went.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and I think perhaps as a result of that process, they really do complement each other really well. I think they speak about the same thing in very different ways, and encourage us to think about this idea of unfinishedness and its interaction with our faith from multiple different angles. So maybe if there's someone else who is also thinking about art or thinking about writing, is there something that you might want to say to encourage them, or to challenge them to think about incorporating their faith into whatever they produce creatively?
I think yeah, the most important thing is to practice, I guess, especially for art. Yeah, so I'm still learning a lot about how to draw certain things. So I actually didn't know how to draw landscapes until last year when I came back from university, and then I forced myself to practice them. So yeah, I think practice, I mean, for one, it develops muscle memory, so that helps the process a lot. Yeah, and you realize like what you're comfortable with, what kind of style you're more suited to. So yeah, it's really important, even though it's been said a lot, the practice makes perfect. As for incorporating faith, I don't know, I don't really have advice for that. I feel like yeah, like God just opens doors. So I mean, he opened this door for me to participate in this project, this really cool project. Yeah, so I think, I mean, if you feel compelled to do something, then it helps to not push prompting down, but to take the leap and see what God leads you to do, because yeah, you never know, he might lead you to places you don't expect and show up skills that you never knew that you had. So
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
yeah,
I'm
thank you.
sure you'll get a lot of practice in writing in your new journalism job, although maybe that might be writing of a different kind.
Yeah.